Now, as much as I want to jump in and start doing some really, really fun things with pieces and examples and talk about gear, and I know if I were you guys, I'd be looking at the stuff behind me going, oh, what's that? What's that thing over there? We'll get to all that. I think for the official first video, it makes the most sense just to talk about my workflow through Cubase, because anything that's been done maybe in the last 3 or 4 years is all going to be through Cubase. And I don't want it to be confusing when it comes down to watching me demonstrate a piece of music that I've written and not understand how it was routed or why I'm pulling up certain channels. So the general idea is, I kind of picture an orchestra if I was standing in front of it and conducting. Meaning that the first violins, the second violins, the cellos, the basses, they all have their own space, but I also want to have control over everything. And that means bussing things. Very, very granular bussing, especially with orchestral things. Same thing goes with synths. I'm kind of old school, so I think of synthesizers the way I see them in my studio, and I want to have them bus that exact same way. If I have it on farms through VE Pro, I want to have a very specific stereo bus that's coming back so I can address just that synthesizer. So the big way that I do that is through either multi-outs in Kontakt or just independent stereo streams coming back in VE Pro from each of the individual VSTs that I'm using, if it's synths, for example. Today, I thought the easiest way to get started is literally just to go here and start with a completely blank canvas. I've got an instance of Kontakt up, and there's nothing else going on. And I'm just going to build something here that's relatively simple. It's not going to be the most amazing piece of music in the world or anything like that, but it is going to be manageable and kind of demonstrate how I think about buses, both in terms of building my composition, mixing, and interactive audio. A lot of that comes down to how it plays into the game, but you have to build the puzzle pieces before you can put the puzzle together. Again, buses. So I'm going to go ahead and apologize up front. I'm trying to do some key switches to get things around so that I can, for example, just do this, and it's me in Cubase. Let's take a look here, and I'm going to open up just this one instance of Kontakt. And first things first, right here, I don't know about you guys, I've got a preset configuration for my outputs down here. And I really like having it set so that there's multiple outs that are already ready to go whenever I open a blank instance of Kontakt. Now that's really easy to do. If you click on this and you say, I want 8 outputs. And they're going to be stereo, and I want to start them right here at stereo 1. As long as you have this box ticked, and for this first time, you tick that box. Now when I click OK, I'm going to have 8 stereo outputs starting with stereo 1, and they're going to be labeled stereo 1 through 8, and it's going to delete everything that's there, except for the aux channels. I don't know anyone that uses aux channels in Kontakt, but that's okay. And it's going to save it as a default. So the next time, unless you want to save it as default, you don't have to tick that box. So there we have our 8 individual outputs in Kontakt. Those are going to correspond with the outputs that you would see in your mixer. Now right now, as you can see, there's only one output. That's because we haven't assigned them in Cubase yet. So you come over here under the inspector, where you see Kontakt 5, activate outputs. Now, you notice that they're not labeled this way. That's because I just reassigned new outputs and I haven't restarted Cubase yet. For some reason, Kontakt isn't speaking with Cubase directly, so you need to restart the app to get the outputs assigned properly. We're actually going to be doing it a different way, so I'm not even going to worry about that quite yet. This is nice as a default output if you want to be able to just drag and drop things in and say, I want this to go out stereo 1, I want this to go out stereo 4. Why would I use different outputs? Mostly it's for bussing and effects. A lot of times in Kontakt I'm doing orchestra, but many other times I'm doing other kinds of things, whether it's any of these gravity expansion packs here for heaviosity, or like Thrill, or the Spitfire Albion kind of hybrid sort of sounds that they have, I'm probably going to want to have an EQ and a compressor and some other things on them. And this way I can have a single instance of Kontakt, load up 16 different instruments in it, and have 16 sets of stereo outputs that I can do effects and routing to, depending on where I want them to go in my bus. For the sake of sanity, let's just put these 4 guys in here. And I'm just going to put it on spiccato, so we have a short sound. Now when I'm doing orchestra music, I always have things separated by long and short first. That's almost more important than having like a low strings or a high strings. But usually, even when you're boiling down to my basic set of stems that export from Cubase, I've got a high string short, a high string long, low string short, and low string long. Having the shorts and the longs separate is really important because a lot of times, especially in games when we're dealing with layers and things, they'll both be playing at the same time. Not intentionally in the game playing at the same time, but I'll write a cue that has one pass of short strings and another pass of long strings so that the engine or whoever's doing the implementation, if it's me or the game developer, has the choice to play either one. It's like an alternate performance almost. Having the shorts and the longs on their own bus means that when I go to export into Cubase, I can have the shorts and longs separated automatically and I don't have to worry about splitting up MIDI tracks or doing anything like that. So now all we need to do is add our MIDI tracks. One thing that I like to do in Kontakt, if I'm going to add, let's say, 4 MIDI tracks, it always defaults to a MIDI track built into the first instance of Kontakt, and I don't like using that. I like having them separate, so if I am going to MIDI channel 1, there's a MIDI track there. So just for my own sanity, a lot of times I'll start with track name 2, and you'll notice that it's auto-named them here. I just go and put this back to 1, that starts on channel 2. I make this 1, and now I've got my 4 MIDI channels that are going to correspond with the 4 instances of Kontakt. What we don't have yet is the outputs correctly assigned. And all you got to do there, whoops, go to your Info tab, and here are your outputs. Now, you could just say, I want this to go out stereo 2, I want this to go out stereo 3, and etc. A lot of times, the mixing page in Kontakt isn't the most intuitive, and you can mean to select something and you're changing the output, you're trying to rename it, and you accidentally select it for deletion. There's a great shortcut right here under Batch Functions that says clear output section and create one individual channel for each loaded instrument. That's my default that I use for everything. So if I'm in VE Pro and I've got 10 instances of Kontakt that have 16 instruments in each instance, I can click this. It always pops up with that. Basically, it's saying, you're going to delete your channels and do new ones. Is that okay? And then look, you've got violin, viola, cello, and bass. And it's naming these outputs based on the names up here. So sometimes if it's a super long name and the articulation's at the end of maybe a 30-character name, it doesn't help quite as much down here. But for me, it's just about knowing that every instance of the instrument in Kontakt is going out of a separate output. So now if I go here and choose these again, you can see they're going out of their separate outputs. You did not hear them because we haven't done the buses yet. Now this is something normally I'm not concerned with doing because I already have it set up. And our outputs, I think we can basically just choose these outputs and it's going to default to being the first 4 pairs. You can even turn that one off. Even though they're not labeled correctly, when you restart Cubase, they will be labeled correctly. So now if we pull this back up and we go to bass, you can see it's going out of bass down here. And it's going out of bass over here. Now a lot of times I would prefer to have my channels labeled correctly and indicate on the mixing board which input and which output are coming in, so it's discrete from Kontakt itself. We're not going to worry about that right now because that gets down to a lot of laundry utility sort of things that we don't need to worry about yet. So let's say we've got our string outputs here, and the only bit of a bummer is those individual Kontakt outputs only show up in the mixing board. There's really no way to get them to show up here in the main window. I'm kind of used to that now. I'll have my MIDI and instrument tracks in the main window, and basically what I think of as returns, like if it were from an actual mixing board and I had all my hardware plugged in, the returns come in on the mixing board only. So it actually clears up a little bit of stuff over here. Let's add another instrument. And one great thing when you click on this, if you want to type in anything like that, as soon as you click on the list, you can type something in, and then you hit the tab key and you can scroll back and forth like this really easily. So it makes it super easy to grab stuff. Basically, you can click this, you tab, and if you hit enter twice, it's going to select it and it's going to build it for you. So now we've got an instance of Zebra here, which is honestly one of my favorite synths in the world. And that's coming out of its own output as well. So Kontakt 5 and then these aux channels. This is actually going to be, I'm just going to call it violins, violas, cello, and bass. But now I know what's what. And we need to check up here. There's lots of filters. That's really the most powerful thing about Cubase, is you can filter so many different things depending on what you want to see at that one point in time, and then you can save them as configurations. I've actually already started because I was doing some practicing before we started recording. I saved an orchestral configuration, but we're going to delete that because we're going to do one from scratch. So what I don't want to see right now are my input channels and my output channels. Rarely do I want to see those. So what we have now, you can see the 4 outputs from Kontakt, our 4 MIDI channels, which we could also label if we wanted to, but it's a lot easier to do it over here. You hit the tab key, it goes to the next. So we've got those labeled, and then this is Zebra, which we're just going to call synth bass for the moment. So those are the channels that we've got going. And a lot of times, I've got multiple libraries, especially for orchestra, that are all going into different buses. The general idea when I work is I've got 3 stages of busing once everything comes back from VE Pro. So once everything comes back, like here, from Kontakt, basically. And all VE Pro does, which stands for Vienna Ensemble Pro, it's a software conduit that talks via Ethernet. So you can have a plugin here in Cubase, and then you have a separate computer, or even outside of your Cubase session on your existing same computer, you have an application running that's VE Pro, and the plugin talks to the application. So you host all your sounds, especially the ones that are super RAM hungry. You host all those in VE Pro, and it keeps it outside of the memory of Cubase or outside of your computer memory whatsoever if you have it in a slave. And the software allows it to talk as if they were still connected. And they come back on returns just the way it would be if you were doing something inside of Cubase. So it really saves, geez, I mean, 70 gigs or 80 gigs, I think, on my 3 machines that I have in the other room. They're all loaded up and ready to go. So it saves me a lot of time from having to load all of those individual things. If I open a session here, and maybe I'm only using 15% of, 7 times the 200 gigabytes of samples that are in the other room, it's still a good 10 or 15 gigs of samples. And if I open up this main session and it starts loading all those samples, I'm sitting there for, 5 or 10 minutes. This way, everything's sitting ready to go, and all it does is connect. So not only does it offline the RAM that you need to load all the samples, it also speeds up loading times. That's for orchestra stuff. For synthesizer things, it loads it on the separate computer when I open each project. And there's different settings you can have in VE Pro that either saves it on the computer or it'll take it away when you close the project and pop it back up when you open the project. The whole next episode is gonna be on VE Pro and how I use that. For right now, I'm just focusing on local Cubase instances. So I have 3 sets of buses that come back from VE Pro. And I'm just gonna call them what I call them, even though we're not doing it yet, because it makes it a lot easier for me. It goes from interplanetary to interstellar and then intergalactic. And those, besides being geeky and kind of fun, kind of interplanetary is the most local, and there's lots and lots of things there. When you get to interstellar, that's kind of where the VST returns and effects and things are coming back in, and it's more of a wide view. And then intergalactic is the biggest view, where I was mentioning high strings short, high strings long, low strings short, low strings long. That's the final version. The great thing about having this 3-set bus system is with the batch audio export in Cubase, you can literally just go in and check which ones you want and either have a super granular, 60 stem export or something that's a lot cleaner and smaller and is maybe 10 or 12 stems. You just check which one you want, uncheck the ones that you don't, hit export, and you're totally good to go. So that's the general idea of what we're going to be building here. Let's just do something that allows us to get an idea of some music. Now I'm going to have to move some of my screens around because I have a 3-monitor setup, which of course we will also go into, that uses different screens, go different places, and a lot of times this MIDI editor window pops up on my left screen over here. And I believe now, if I did that, it's going to pop up in the same place, which is really the important thing. Let's do this just because it's fun. So now, all right. One of the things that I'm going to do, it's the problem with just doing a simple intro on workflow. There's so many different things that I want to talk about, but the shortcuts in Cubase are super powerful, and kind of being able to have everything on the iPad, which is another episode, and pull up windows and commands that way, plus the key commands that I have really go a long way to helping me do things fast. So I have the Q key set to quantize, and it quantizes whatever the grid is, however I want it set. It can be whole notes, or half notes, or triplet half notes, or quarter notes, or eighth notes, or 16th notes. So if I set to 16, which to me is just the 6 at the top of my keyboard, all I have to do is hit 6 and Q, and it's going to quantize. And if I hit Option Q, it'll change the length of the notes. I keep pointing to the screen like you guys are sitting next to me. Let me use the mouse. It changes the length of the notes to whatever the snap is. So now we have this. And all we're really going to do is just loop that. As a matter of fact, let's do this and take it down an octave, which again is another I have a key shortcut that will grab everything. If we're over here, let's say, doing something and I want to adjust this, I just do a key and it'll grab it. And then I also have something that keeps track of octaves, so I can pop it up and down an octave at a time. If I wanted to, I could add an octave higher or add an octave lower. This will be a probably key commands shortcut macro for Cubase, independent episode, and all this stuff is going to be available if you, for whatever reason, just want to grab all my key commands and follow along and use the same ones that I'm using. I'm going to post that up on a Patreon, which is going to be whatever the basic, I think for $1 a month is the cheapest way to do it. And I just wanted to have a really easy way to share everything that I'm doing. We'll also post this particular Cubase file will be posted once it's finished. Basically, whatever I'm working on that particular session, the files, MIDI or Cubase, or if we're doing recording, the recordings, if we're building a sample instrument, maybe from some bongos or something like that, that'll be available. You guys can download it and grab it and do what you want with it. And it seems like, unless someone has a better idea, Patreon is the most straightforward. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the video. So, what I'm thinking about doing is figuring out a way to layer these so that that's kind of the beginning of the file. And just to make things a little, we'll put that up an octave. And then let's just do some sort of probably a question will come about with action music, and is this how I normally start? I was pulling up violins because it was more straightforward. If I was writing an action cue today, and it was going to be something like that, I probably actually would start with the violins. A lot of it for me is a matter of kind of the skeleton, like the spine of the cue, like what's it all based on, and if there's going to be some big percussion or something, like Far Cry Primal, I'm probably starting with drums and coming up with rhythms, and it's going to have crazy meter changes and things like that. If it's going to be more of a straightforward kind of tense action cue, which is what this sort of feels like, I probably would do this, start with violins, so I've got a feeling for the groove, and kind of work my way down. Basically, we're on the hi-hats here. I'm a drummer, and I just, especially with strings, I tend to think high strings, kind of hi-hats and cymbals, and then violas and cellos maybe are a little more of the snare, or the violas and the contrabass might be more the kick drum. Depends on how complicated the part is. So let's do, well, let's go for a snare. And I have no idea what I'm going to play, but you know. Yes, my microphone was just turned off. Trust me, you didn't miss anything. That was cool. What was it though? Sixteenth notes, quantize. Now a lot of times I will record the controller 7, controller 11, controller 1, whatever MIDI data I've got to get the volumes and everything balanced out beforehand. This is just for ease of demonstration more than anything else. So I'm not really working on that. I'm just sort of trying to put something together as quickly as I can. I did hear a funky noise though. That. What is that? Did I discover a... There's a funky sample there. Maybe if we do that. To be fair, since I'm hosting everything here locally and not using VE Pro, that's why I'm building it all from scratch. But I usually don't use strings on this computer, and that's some sort of an anomaly. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I've got the Novo stuff on my main machine, because that was when I would use some sound designy sort of things. Nope. Just, okay. Well, if we're gonna do that, let's make it a tritone. There we go. There's probably a bad sample in there that I need to take care of. Put that on my 10,000 things to do to get the studio up-to-date list. All right, so we can loop that ad nauseum. Let's just make our life easy and grab this and do that. All right. Now, if we look at our mixing board, we've got a couple different things happening. I got MIDI channels going on here, audio channels going on here, and a synth going on. This is where having 3 different mix consoles in Cubase really, really helps. You notice this one's mix console 3. That's what I just sort of end up using as my default. That would be down here on the left screen, and usually I can see it all the time. And I would have it grouped. So one of the things that I would probably do is add a configuration and call it orchestra, which is what you saw before I deleted it. And I'm going to change my visibility here and turn off the MIDI channels. And I'm going to hide, which for me is just H. Hide that. Now all I see are my orchestra audio returns. And I'm going to hit update. So I can do another configuration and call it synth. And see, over here is our visibility. I'm going to turn that guy on and turn these guys off and save that one. So now I can go back and forth between orchestra and synth. Now it seems a little silly to do this when there's 5 channels here, but I've got thousands of channels in my template, so it really helps to be able to zone in on specific groups of sounds. Basically I have them broken up into, I can read my iPad right here, orchestra, drums and hits, synths, and loops. And then after that, and this is under my visibility configurations here, it goes to the interplanetary, interstellar, and intergalactic, which gets bigger, smaller, and smaller as we move away. My mom just watched the YouTube video and said it looks very exciting. So now, if we're going to just loop this, I can see the orchestra, and then I can go here, and I can see the synth. It's actually not turning anything on, not turning anything off, it's just changing the view of the mixing board. Now with all of my orchestra stuff, I have reverb synths. So what we're going to do is add an effects track. I really love the UAD lexicon. Let's just call it string short for right now, just to make things easy. Normally I would have a string high short and a string low short, but there's our reverb. I'm going to put it on large hall and make sure that the system noise is turned off. That looks great. So it's just a matter of assigning. And this is another reason that it's really nice to have a template. When you add new channels in Cubase, they're going to propagate through all of your views unless you have specific configurations set to filter out certain things. So if I go here and I say I don't want to see effects channels, see it just disappeared, or I don't want to see VCA faders, I don't want to see sampler channels, I don't want to see any of this stuff except for instrument channels. That way I'm not seeing the reverb. But what I do want to see is reverb somewhere. And I believe shift, nope. There we go. So that's our effects. And I'm going to click hide. And there's a, right here, update configuration. It's grayed out right now because I just did it, but I have a shortcut on my iPad right below all of my different views that just shows a little swirly arrow thing. It will update the configuration automatically. So when I'm switching around, it's right at the bottom, and I know if I hide something or add something, I just hit that and it updates it automatically. So now I've got orchestra, I've got synth, see, there it is again, update, and I've got effects. And this is all standard, just routing out of one stereo main output now. We're going to get a little more complicated a little bit later. But one thing that I would like to do, this is another thing I love about Cubase, so you can hit Q-Link, and then anything that you have selected is going to automatically do basically the same thing. So if I go here and I want to do string short, it's going to assign all of them the same thing, and basically they just work in tandem. So you can hear, it's basically just giving it a tail. I'm going to pull it down a little bit. Very nice. Now a lot of times when I'm dealing with orchestra stuff, I actually have 2 or 3 reverbs that are set to string high short. So this is the simple version, and in a couple of episodes when we get to the big template, there's a string high short short, string high short medium, and string high short long. And a lot of times they're dialed in to different lengths on the tails. Sometimes the early reflections are turned off. It just depends on the kind of sound I'm going for, but they're usually all the lexicons. All right, we've got this set up now. Oh, I'll leave that open. And our synth bass, which is up here. I'm so used to tapping keys on my iPad, going this way with the mouse is a little crazy. So now let's talk about outputs. Right now everything's going to the stereo out. Let me pull this other mixer up and bring it, come back, bring it over here. So this is the big main mixer that's normally on my 3rd monitor up there, which is just a big flat screen TV. And it is not set up the way I normally look at it, because everything's showing down here. And a lot of times I just view MIDI channels on this one. See, this is just called Mix Console. It's not Mix Console 2 or Mix Console 3. So I can see my MIDI channels and see if automation's turned on, see if things are moving up and down. And then over here I have my control room, which is always important if I'm doing anything. Usually it's a little longer. If I'm doing anything with recording, especially drum sets or percussion sort of things, I have independent control over the click, the track itself, live drums, whatever it is I'm recording, and then talkback if I have maybe a friend like my friend Alan over here helping me with recording things. And then this is the main room. But right here is what we're looking at. There's a stereo out, which is where everything is going to go. Now, if you're doing any sort of processing on your master bus, any kind of limiting, compression, EQ, that's where it's going to live. I get in trouble because I like to explore options, and a lot of times I have 5 or 6 of each one of those things lined up. So instead of having a specific stereo out here, a lot of times what I'll do, it's been so long since I've set this up. Is it a bus channel? Is it an audio track? I didn't think about researching this beforehand. I don't think it's a group. I think it's an audio track. So let's call this EQ. And it's going to go to stereo out. I'm going to pull up my mixing board here. See, there's routing here. So if I go to Orchestra and click on routing, you can see everything's going to stereo out. Hide. Refresh. I don't want them to go to stereo out. Nothing is going to go to stereo out. Right now we're going to do no bus. This is the only way I can be sure that I've got things routed correctly. No bus. And same thing with the effects. Everything defaults to going to stereo out. What we want to do is create some buses so that they have a place to go. Or a group track, that's the... How many do we want to do? Why don't we do high strings, low strings, synth bass, and drums. So we'll do 4. And let's call them that. High strings, low strings, synth bass, and drums. Now we can start routing things through these buses. And like I mentioned before, this is the simple version. This is kind of the intergalactic version, the furthest away, least granular version of busing that I use. But as you can see here, when I pull up my export, over here are the group channels. So you just choose them, click the ones you want, and anything that's going through that group channel will export for you in faster than real time, which is really, really nice. First thing I'm going to do is duplicate this because we only have 1 and we're going to need 2 since we're busing. String short high, string short low, which means, as you guessed it, our orchestra sends need to be changed as well. So these are set to high, which is great. All we have to do here is set this to low. We've got the same send amount on it, but it's going to low instead. Now this isn't because I want to have different reverbs on the string high versus the string low. This is so that when I choose that bus and I bus out string low, it's got the same kind of reverb on it that string high does. And for my sanity, we're going to hide all of this. This is the best thing about having a template, is you don't have to add any additional tracks and everything's already in the views that you want. So we should be able to see, let me go back to our reverbs here. String high and string low. That's where they're going, but where are they outputting to? Well, this is going to output to high strings, and this is going to output to low strings. I'm going to add another configuration, and let's just call it buses, for lack of anything better to do. And here they are right here. So there we have our buses. The buses are going to the stereo out, which is why you can hear them. But we're not finished adding channels yet. What we actually want the buses to do, and I keep pulling this up because it just makes it a lot easier to assign things. We want to go to, okay, EQ is not listed here, which means maybe it is a bus. It'd be so much easier if I could open up my my big template and take a look. It must be a group track. So let's call this EQ. Let's delete you. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. The general idea is usually I have 3 sets of faders. Depending on how I want them to work. and they kind of cascade into each other. So if I pull this mixing board up again, the EQ is going into the comp. The comp, which is short for compressor, is going into the effects. The effects is going into the stereo out, which a lot of times I rename. You're not missing anything, I'm just renaming it. I call it main out. So it's going to the main out. Now all we have to do is assign these 3 buses, well 4 if we include the drums, to the comp, EQ I mean. And if this is our bus view, we're going to hide these. So everything's filtering through, and then this goes to the main output, which we can see right there. Now again, there's not a lot of tracks here, so it does seem a little silly to have this much information for 5 tracks that are playing. But when it gets bigger, it makes it a lot more manageable. And what this allows me to do is on my inserts, I can say, I want to have a Pro Q, I want to have a nice Neve, and I want to have a manly passive master. Manly, massive, passive, easy to say, like my favorite EQ in the world. So I've got these 3 EQs here, and if I Option or Alt click on them, it's going to turn them off completely and they're unloaded and you don't hear anything. It's like they don't exist. No processing power is taken, but I could also just leave them in bypass mode if I wanted to. Helps if that's turned on. So I can have them bypassed. This, by the way, this little magic button up here, constrain delay compensation, as technical as that sounds, it essentially turns off all your plugins and processing. So if you're recording something live, for example, you get practically no latency at all, and it really makes a big difference. I have my template starting with that turned, well, the button is turned on. So constrained delay compensation is on, and that way if I'm playing anything on the keyboard, there's no latency in it. It just helps keep things tight. So the same thing would apply over here. You guessed it, if I wanted to do something, maybe have the 33609 right there, which is here. Or the Fairchild, the 670, of course. So these are all options, and they can either be bypassed or just completely turned off. It's one of the things I love about Cubase. You can deactivate plugins the same way you can deactivate tracks, and they're literally invisible. Now the effects is really more like if I wanted to have tape in there, or a master sort of, the inflator, that's a cool one, the Oxford inflator. I'm not going to fill all this stuff up. We'll get into it more when we get our final big template discussion. The main out is usually reserved for things like visualizers, which it seems like that one probably needs to be put back in. I really, really love this one. I bought it when it came out, but now a lot of times at the end of my effects chain, I've always got some sort of a limiter, and I'm just kind of stuck with FabFilter because I love it so much. I mean, who doesn't? Now this makes it easy because if I, by the way, you can Option or Alt and hit P. Maybe that was a shortcut that I made. It'll close all your plugins, which is really nice. You can also Shift Option click on the E on any channel, and it will open all the plugins assigned to that channel. And then Option P and it closes them back out. So what's important for me here is I've got these kind of chained on separate buses, so I'm not running out of room. I'm not having to click and maybe switch another one out and take that one in, and everything's there. I just kind of turn it on and bypass, or turn it off and let it go. Now, a lot of times I normally have some sort of a compressor. This is a very, very quiet track. And, you know, we'll come back to this when we'll put some silly drum beat behind it, just because, you know, it's fun. But if I wanted to add a little bit of top end, you can hear that. Oh, such a great top end. A little bit of bottom, and then maybe carve a little something out. Or maybe I wanted to try something different with a massive passive. Easy to bypass and choose which one you want. Or maybe do a little bit of both, because a lot of times the Pro Q is very surgical and transparent and wonderful. The 31102 just has a really, really nice sound. And the massive passive, I mean, I've got the hardware version, and it's super silky. Those are kind of my 3 major stereo bus plugins that I love to go to. And I use them for different things. All right, so we've got those 3 guys set up. Let me save that. We've got our effects. We're going to get rid of these. Hide, excuse me. We're going to hide those. We've got our synthesizers. See, everything propagates. And we've got our orchestra channels. So it makes it really easy, especially once you have this worked in, to see how they label them, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now these aren't the same, obviously, groups of faders that I have on my iPad, but I can hit 1, 2, 3, or 4, even though it's not labeled the same, and it pulls it up immediately. So it's real easy for me if I say, oh, I want to see the groups. I hit 6, which brings up mixing board 3, and there we go. Really easy to manage when you have lots and lots of tracks. And then since you have instant gratification pulling them up on the mixing board, there's no reason to see any of this stuff. And what you're really left watching is your MIDI tracks, and enables you to focus really well on them. And same thing goes for outputs. There's a great routing method you can use if you're listening to... Now this is a MIDI channel. I'm going to go ahead and hide this. These are just the 4 orchestra MIDI channels. Let's see, in the inspector over here, this is actually referencing, here's your MIDI fader. I don't have any volume automation, that's why it looks that way. But if you notice here, Cubase knows that it's referencing the violins. Let's not make ourselves insane. And it even has an output assignment here. And you can pull down the fader. There you go. You go to violas, and you switch this output to violas. Go to cellos, switch this to cellos. Go to basses and switch this to basses. Now you don't even have the VST in your main window. I'm just switching between instances of MIDI channels, and I'm getting, there I go pointing with my hand again, I'm getting the corresponding audio fader to pop up, which means, look at here, here's all my inserts. So if I wanted to put something crazy on the cellos, for example, well, that's where it goes. This is the actual Kontakt output that we labeled at the very beginning of the video. And then same thing with the bass. This is a built-in kind of VST and MIDI channel at the same time. So it's nice to be able to switch. I have a couple of things set up in Cubase that I really like. Auto record enabling the channels when I switch, so it's easy for me to arrow up and down if I want to listen to something. Also auto soloing, as you can see, I'm moving up and down. It's soloing and record enabling automatically. If I don't have solo on, it won't follow it, but solo is something I use all the time. I've got that set to a couple of the function keys at the top of the keyboard. And clear solo is basically just control of the same thing. So it's easy for me to set them up, and program, I can listen to something unsolo really fast without having to click up there. So I hope it's making a little more sense if you're talking about thousands of tracks, how having a template like this really helps you kind of get your hands on the sounds and there's less mousing around all the time. So why don't we do a drum thing real quick? How about just something... This is where I really wish this could be like in real time. Now see, you have your output routing that you can assign. Now it defaults to the main out, but this is your whole list of things. And as you can see under groups here, EQ, compressor, and effects. I'm going to default to the main out. Something else actually that I do that to me makes a lot of sense is these get certain kinds of icons in front of them. Whoops. For the masters, I like having an equal sign because when you pull it up here, it makes it really easy to see where it is exactly you're going. I've got icons in front of all of my folders and groups and everything, and I just remembered that that's one of the ones why it didn't look right to me, because I'm used to seeing it with the equal sign in front of it. And the nice thing is, if you have a channel list that scrolls off the page, all you have to do is click on select output routing and I type in equals and it's going to automatically pop them up for me and I can just go EQ because I know that's always my first one and I know that they're chained together. Are we good? It's on the main out for right now, which is no problem. Okay, let's see here. How about, let's just do some crazy cool industrial mashup breakout. What do we got? We have to go back and select our track. All right, great. Gosh, I love Heaviosity. Hey, guess what? That sounds like it'll be perfect. Now, I don't even have to zoom in here. I already know that I want to do quarter notes. So if I hit 4 and just hit Q, you can see it pops it in automatically. And if I hit Option Q, if you watch right here at the ends, it tails everything in for me and makes it so that it will loop perfectly. This is going to go out of let's add a drum bus. Orchestra synth effects. I'm going to add another configuration and call it drums, to which we will only have DM307. That's going to go out. A drum bus, which I'm going to add next. Now, one of the great things is the mixing boards have a completely different configuration than the actual Cubase window. So if I pull this up, so I've got 5 different sets of configurations, and those are going to be equal across all 3 of the Cubase mix consoles. But it's completely different when you're in this view. So that enables you to do things like, I think I use it, I've got one that's set for effects, so it only shows me my effects. I've got one that's set for buses. Actually, let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's call this instruments. And I'm going to add another one and call it buses. Now I'm already on buses, so if I go over here to visibility and just want all these, there are my buses. And I can hit refresh. Now I can go to instruments, there's my instruments. I can go to buses, there's my buses. A lot of times when I'm doing routing assignment, it's just easier for me to visualize the workflow having it this way in a mixing board. But I'm old school. So that's going to go to drums. If we go to, and then this actually needs to be earlier, so I'm going to move to configuration 3. So now it's orchestra, synth, drums, and then effects and buses. And that's the way the audio flows in my head. I've got the effects send set up before the bus that the send is going into. So that way I know that the individual reverbs or delays or anything like that is being bussed out appropriately when I'm doing stems. Back to instruments, drums. We go to buses and hide that. So we know that it's going out. It's got its correct output there. Now, if I wanted to have a send, what else do we have here? Let's add a configuration and call it effects. And we're just going to have shift clicking, that's it. Shift clicking solos. High string, low string, those are the buses. Here we go, effects. This is another reason that I'm getting a little confused, because in my template, I have an X at the beginning of every single one of my effects. So, as per this example right here, if I'm going to route something to an effects channel, I can see really quickly that there's actually an effect there. Let's save that. Let's add another effect, and what's a good, oh, gosh, I really love sound toys. Let's put crystallizer on it. Now there's a couple of different ways you can add effects. A lot of times I find it easier to run it in serial, meaning if I'm on my drum channel here, and maybe I'm viewing it like this, I've got my inserts, so I could put crystallizer here instead. A lot of it depends on whether or not you're sharing it with other things. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm putting it in the effect folder and I'm running it in parallel so that it's going out instead of having it serial just right here in the local insert strip. The only difference is if it's in the effect folder and it's running parallel, meaning you've got your dry signal coming out and then the effect channel is coming out a different output, it enables you to share that effect with other things. For example, with reverb. That's why I use my orchestra stems with effects running parallel in the effect folder. Normally, I think I would have this on the actual instrument itself, but for the sake of demonstration, we're just running it through the effect folder. So here's my inserts. Did I put an X before it? I bet I didn't. If I go to sends, crystal. But see, you're gonna get this from me, especially when I'm building things from scratch and I'm used to using them other ways. It's gotta be the way I want it. Otherwise, it'll just make me a little crazy. So I can click on this and do that, and then I hit a shortcut and it's gonna loop for me. I hit another shortcut and it's gonna solo. And I'm gonna go there. Now I have to re-solo the channel in order for crystallizer to come back in. It got a little loud. Now the other cool thing about having it as a send, meaning running parallel, as opposed to having it as an insert, and this all goes back to this is why I love it so much, because I mean I grew up technology-wise in kind of the late 80s and early 90s. So I had a single keyboard in the drum machine, and I had an external Alesis like MIDI verb or something like that. So it's easy for me to think about an insert where literally you are inserting the cables into the piece of equipment, as opposed to a send, which literally means you are sending the signal to another piece of equipment. The nice thing about sends, which is also parallel processing, is now that I've got the crystallizer coming in on a separate return right here that's being soloed, I can actually add effects or filters or whatever I want, or change the level really, really easy just right here on this fader. And I don't have to open up the crystallizer interface, which is right here, by the way. Sound Toys, will probably have a whole episode on Sound Toys. I really, really love their stuff for effects. And I'm just going to leave it at the default because that sounded kind of cool, and you know, why not? But see, if I wanted to, I could put an insert here, like let's just say I wanted to do a Pro Q, and I basically just kind of scooped out the top and the bottom, accentuated something, and now you've got a slightly different effect. Now if I had done that here on the insert of the DM307, I would have been EQing the original signal as well. It wouldn't have just been EQing the effect. And you can't put an EQ over here because that's just another send going someplace else. So literally this is going out to the crystallizer. The crystallizer is coming in here. And where is it going? It's going to the, oops, so this is equals. It's going to the EQ. Oh, another nice thing, this is what I really love. So I can click on this, and I hit equal, and I hit enter, because it's automatically selecting the first one. If we go to buses, and hide that. So I've got control over all of that, and we're going to just bypass this because, you know, it sounds kind of dull without it now, doesn't it? I hope I'm doing okay working on one screen here. It's definitely different from what I'm used to normally doing on 3, but I think it's totally worth it. Get rid of view as well, view-wise, and drums. You can also set up filters for these individual configurations that will automatically filter out certain things. I'm just going to get into that on the big template example and not worry about confusing everybody and trying to talk about too much stuff. So obviously it's really, really quiet here. And this is one of the things that's really nice to have if we wanted to, well, the first thing we should do is make sure that our volumes, just make sure they're all turned up. And a lot of times for me, it's just a matter of doing a quick recording pass of data that looks like that. Another shortcut that I really love is you can have Cubase only show you automation lanes, which is this down here, that are being used. So if I undid that recording and I pop this up, you see there's no lanes down here. If I close it out and I redo the recording, and now I do the same thing, it's showing me the automation that I used. Oh my gosh, it's such a time saver. And it zooms in correctly, and it's got the correct heights and everything. It's really, really, really nice. And I'm going to keep that separate because I don't want to keep seeing the automation. I don't really care about that. It's not a problem. Let me mute these guys. I know it's a lot of reverb, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. Let's see how our levels are. So the levels are looking nice. And I'm going to go to effects and I'm going to pull down the reverb a little bit. Now imagine this was 250 MIDI channels instead of 4. Being able to just go here and do this and maybe do that, because I know that those are coming out only for the short lows, only for the short highs. And I can also go to our buses. We need to do another bus set. Let's see. High string, low string. This is really kind of like I need 2 sets of buses. So I'm going to add another configuration. I guess it's time to have some lunch. Let's just call it master. And now I'm going to take the buses and those are going to be our actual instrument buses. So it goes from the buses to the master. And again, this is how I have it on the big template. It's just they're named slightly differently. I use pluses to kind of determine the depth of the bus structure. But this is what I was trying to get to. So we've got our high strings and low strings. Now imagine those high strings were a lot more than just Novo. I had Cinematic Studio strings, I had maybe some Spitfire chamber strings on there. They've all got their own EQs back at the more interplanetary level where everything's coming in. So Spitfire's coming in and Novo's coming in. Everything's all separated. But here, when I'm listening to it, I want to EQ all the high short strings just a little bit. And that's where this becomes really powerful because I know all my high strings are coming in through that one bus. The first thing I'm automatically going to do is shave off some of the low end and get rid of a little bit of that. It's usually right around and then let's pretend like we're not going to use another EQ and I'm just going to add a shelf. No, I'm not. I'm going to leave it alone. So that's that. And now let's listen to these. If you want to copy inserts across, a lot of times when I'm doing anything in Cubase, it's so much easier to copy something and edit it than it is to try to start from scratch building something, whether it's an instrument or a channel. It'll copy all the routing and everything for you. So a lot of times, like with this, you just drag, just click up here and drag across, it's going to copy that for you. And I've got at least a starting point of the same kind of EQ. I got no problem with that. Now, if this was my 3-bus system, there would probably be a little bit of compression if these were our final stems. So the high string stem was the final stem that was going out. I'm getting my reverb return, aren't I? Yep. So my short high reverb is going to high strings. So the reverb return's coming in there. And again, since this bus is after the verb, not only was I EQing the strings, I was also EQing the reverb. And a lot of times I end up doing that. The verb is great, but there's always some lower mids and especially some low end that I just don't want to have. And I have the choice of putting that on the reverb return itself, just like we did with the crystallizer, where I've got an insert here for FabFilter Pro Q. I could have one over here and dial that back a little bit too. It would depend. If I was carving that space out here on the buses and it sounded like it was taking too much out, I would probably then go to the reverb return and just put the EQ there, because I don't want to take it out of the strings, I just want to take it out of the verb. And the nice thing is here, if I put like an LA2A on the strings, the LA2A is like, there'll be a whole thing on compression too. This is one of my favorite things. It's like an auto attack and release. You just move a couple knobs and you're good. More volume. Okie doke. I'm just going to copy that over here. Click and Alt or Option drag will copy it for you. See, we already have our threshold. It's still a little verby. If this were an action piece, I'd have it drier, but for demonstration purposes, it's totally fine. Now, a lot of times when it comes down to synthesizers and drums and things like that, I'm not doing a lot of processing on the last bus because I've already had the processing done earlier in the audio chain. But what I will have is compression. If this were my last stage of busing, I would probably have an EQ and a compressor strapped across every single one of them, because a lot of what I'm doing doesn't have any stereo processing on it at all. So all these things we have down here for the master, none of these would be turned on, and the limiter would be here, I think the way I have it set up. Nope, there we go. Purely just for a brick wall limiter so that nothing goes over. And I do like having the scope so I can see what the waveform is going to look like. Especially if you're talking about drums and things and you want to really squash them. A lot of times seeing the waveform is a very intuitive way to figure out how loud something's going to be. Ah, why are we not hearing the synth bass? Anyone? Anyone? Because we haven't routed it yet. That's correct. No target on the output. So if I pull this guy up, we go to our synths. It's not going anywhere. And what we need to do is assign it to our output. I'm going to have to, just pardon me for a second, I'm going to have to label my, my groups as well, because just out of habit, I look for these little icons and I get a 10 millisecond panic that shoots through my body. Like, why is that not there? Okay, it's because in my head I do this and I automatically look for groups because I hit the plus command. So now I know that's going to go to synth bass. Now, if it was the only synth bass I was using, there's a good chance that I would have compressed it and EQ'd it locally, like right on the VST. And if it was the only one, it might not need any compression on the back end, but most of the time it's not the only one, and everything does need a little bit of compression, and it's just a matter of dialing it in a little bit. Apologies. Now, the nice thing about this is I can listen to it in context with the song. Imagine that there's a couple of different synth-based things that are going, maybe a low pulse and something else happening, and instead of having to go in and dial in each one, once I get a general level, I can just hit solo on this main bus right here and listen to it and decide how much EQ or compression I want to do based on what the other buses have gotten. That's pretty, I just love the Pro Q. So let's say that the low end's going to come from the drums. Now, what would be a good compressor for that? What's going through my head right now is the AA02. It's just so great on kind of, like, it's not super transient drums. We'll put the Fairchild on there because that's another similar sort of compressor. It's got some things to tweak, but keep it on 5. And what it's doing is it's reeling in the big pulse, making it a little quieter, and then the echoes that you hear in the background, it's pushing them forward. So instead of being like accent delay echoes, it's kind of doing that, which will hopefully make it stand out a little more in the track. Keep the drums muted. So let's pretend that I am using this as an action track, and I want to go into the lexicons. I'm going to hit Q-Link and pop both of these up and let you see them at the same time. Here's the highs and here's the shorts. I want to pull this return down to more like a second. Short, low, short, high, and then I'm going to yeah. Okay. Last but not least, we really turned that down, didn't we? All right, so I want to hear it without the crystallizer, which we can't. Why? Why can't we hear it? Because it hasn't been routed yet. I mean, I'm just assuming. I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants here, but it's going to drums. It's going to the groups. All right. Let's do a little bit of housekeeping here. Let's look at everything. I need drums to have a plus in front of it or I'll lose my mind. All right. This is your kind of master. Number of visible tracks. Click to show all, which when you see something, no, I can't, but you see the exclamation point in brackets at the end of that, that means you haven't assigned a key command to it yet. So literally you could assign a key command, you could hit, Option A or something like that, and it'll show all of your tracks. And that's another grouping filter for these tracks down here. I'm going to go back to instruments. So we'll just do something fun as a demonstration. How about gosh, I love sound toys. Tremolator. Oh, it's later than I thought. This is a really great plugin. I'm going to put it on 16th notes. I always go the wrong way. All right, we'll just so now we've got that for fun. Now let's hear how that sounds with everything else. We go to our buses. We've got our drums right here. And again, just for argument's sake, let's pretend like that's that drum set plus some other kind of funky drum things going on. And I basically want to glue them together a little more, make them sound like they're fitting in with the orchestra and synth bass. Because I think that sounds like a pretty good balance. Now what I'm really looking for here, I want these to balance first. Since the bass is sounding good with the strings, I want to get the drums sounding good with the bass, and then hopefully if we solo them, unsolo them all again, maybe they'll match a little bit better. So see, the drums are kind of covering up a little bit of the bass. Fairchild. No, I'm going to first do a little bit of EQing. See, I don't know if you noticed, but my mouse was flying right over here to where it's like 5 or 6, and because that was what was sticking out to me. I don't necessarily want to pull the whole thing down, so we're going to do a multi-band compressor. Hey, look, another fab filter. Right about there. Then we'll do a quick EQ. By no means take this as a mixing tutorial. This is really just me showing how I use the stems and going just, you know. So I know I'm at D right now, which is the frequency that I want to push. Ideally, I would be doing this. There was a kick, a snare, and hi-hats, like 3 things that I triggered all at the same time. Those would actually be on different instances, and I'd be doing this for each one. But this is just a super quick way to kind of get something jiving. And then let's put on an 1176 and get some cool pumping kinds of This is another important note to make. When I've got that 3-bus system of interplanetary, interstellar, and intergalactic. Intergalactic, the last one, I hardly ever do what I'm doing right now, adjusting the master fader. If it really needs to be done, I'll do it, but I do it knowing that the ramifications it has rippling backwards to all the other buses. So usually if I need to adjust something like this, it's been done on a previous bus, for what that's worth. So I'm still trying to get a handle on whether the speakers being loud make a difference with the microphone. This is, after all, my first official video, but I just unmuted the speakers and hopefully it's not too bad. I need to hear it a little bit louder to be able to get a sense of the mix. Yeah, that'll definitely do for demonstration purposes. So really the only other thing that I look at here on the master out, if I'm doing a stereo out, would be the things that we discussed. But honestly, a lot of times I will bounce the stems out exactly the way they are and not do any additional processing because they're going to be mixed and matched so much anyway. They're going to be put into a game engine. There's going to be compressor, EQ, and limiting in the game engine itself. And it's kind of like a pre-master sort of idea. And I think that's probably more or less the creative flow. It's bigger in my main template, but the general idea remains the same. Patreon. So one of the things that I really want to do, and this is where I was asking for some help, I want to be able to share whatever it is I'm talking about with whoever it is that wants to download it and grab it. So if I'm doing like Home to Me, this song that I did for Moss, a game that came out a couple of, a month and a half ago, I want to be able to share the guitar and vocal sheet music to that song. I want to be able to share this project that I worked on so that if you have Cubase, you can download it and look at the routing. And I believe all of these configurations and things are per project, so they will all be intact and you can switch through them and see what the differences make. I want to be able to share percussion recordings if we do percussion things, or if I build an instrument out of sampling a bowed gong or something. I want you guys to be able to download it and mess with it and have fun, and then come back with questions if you have any. So Patreon seems to me to be the most straightforward way to do that. I believe that it's $1 a month, and you have the choice of either signing up and just getting billed for $1 at the beginning of every month and you have complete access to everything that I'm going to put up there, or if money's super tight, you can just wait until something looks really interesting. You pay that $1, then you have access to everything. I'm not going to have tiers or anything like that. It's all basically, it's all or nothing. So if you want to, you could wait 6 months, pay $1 and grab everything, and then wait another 6 months. So the point isn't that I'm getting $1 for you to grab the things. The point is you can grab the things, and it's really easy for me to just put them up on my main Patreon host page or whatever they call it. Money-wise, everything's basically going to be going to toys and good interactivity agents for all of the animals. We've got a lot of animals, so it could be for the goats or the chickens or the parrots or the python. I mean, for the hedgehog, it's kind of going to just go into an animal sort of fund. So I'm hoping that I will figure all this out. When I post the video, there'll be a link at the bottom, and I'll have these particular files, including the stems, which I will export, that you can grab and manipulate and figure out. So I'll also have a list of the plugins that we went through in case you're just particularly curious in the comments. And I think maybe the last thing to do here is to show how the stems work. My only hesitation is, I don't know if I cleared my my Windows browser window Yeah, I think I might have to... Okay, back. Got everything worked out, confidential stuff hidden and everything. So let's export these real quick and I can show you again how great the bussing and having all these little extra letters and things really makes a big difference when it comes to stems. So what I'm going to do is grab all of these and define my little range here. Now whatever I choose track-wise in the next window is going to be bounced between these two markers. So I've just got some input and some output, at the beginning and the end, some silence. Now when I choose bounce, I get this list. These are all the tracks. And if I wanted to just do my group channels, all I got to do is click down here and enter plus, and there's all of my group channels. If I choose channel batch export, I have the ability to just select them. And it's only selecting what you view. So if I wanted to bounce just a stereo mix of some sort, I would do the equal sign, which is not working right there. There we go, the equal sign. And it's only going to show me the equals down here. Of course, I already selected these, which is why they were showing up, but there we go. It's only going to show me the master stereo buses. So the filtering and everything is just really, really great in Cubase. Now in this case, I'm going to do the stems, select those, and I'm going to delete this filter, and I also want to do the main out. So the main out is going to be what's going out of the stereo out, but we don't have any EQ or anything on it, so it's literally just a stereo sum of those 4 stems that we did. A lot of times I find for clients, it's great for them to have the stems, but it's also really nice to have the main out so they can hear the mix as it stands and not have to piece it all together in Pro Tools or something. Naming schemes, it actually works out really well too. It's going to name them exactly this channel name plus whatever I call it. Right now it's just Cubase workflow, and I've got it going to my export folder. So it spits it all out. And if we go to here, here's my export folder, and here are the stems. So you've got the name, the little underscore, there's the pluses. You can see that we've got our waveforms, everything looks great. And there's the main out, which is obviously louder because everything's summing, and then these are quieter. Now sometimes, depending on the project, I might have something that is multiple stages of bussing. So there might be 1 plus, there might be 2 plus, there might be 3 pluses, depending on kind of what I needed to do with the effects and everything. But the nice thing is the client can see the file name and understand if it says plus 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 high strings and it's in all capitals, because that's how I do it. They know that's the master high string bus. A lot of times if I have multiple maybe high string stems, it'll just be plus high strings, like 01, 02, 03. So the naming system helps me organize things, but it also helps clients on the back end kind of make sense of stuff when you get this folder with 20 stems in it. At least everything's named correctly. I think that's probably it for this one. Thanks for watching and listening, and I hope there was some information in there that really helped out, and I will see you guys next time.